These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the two murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out, brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was quote, calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Thursday as we're heading into this holiday weekend. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're going to be talking with Carrie Lucas in just a moment. We'll get into that, a discussion about family leave. I also want to get into the ugly truth about poverty, crime, and politics. In the second hour of our program, Professor Richard Wolff is going to be joining us about savers versus spenders in the economy. It's more interesting than it sounds. I'll give you more detail on that a little bit later. In our third hour, Dr. Joy Lewis here. Is it time for a reckoning for communities that have been, basically suffering the consequences of severe poverty and crime, and what can be done? So, but starting off, Carrie Lucas is on the line with us. Carrie is the president of the Independent Women's Forum, the author of Checking Progressive Privilege, Mom of 5. IWF.org is the website. Carrie Lucas, CarrieLukas, is her Twitter handle. Carrie, welcome back. It's been a while since we've talked. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
And happy Thursday. My question is, shouldn't we join the rest of the developed world in protecting and nurturing our children during their most critical developmental period, the first 3 months of their lives? Shouldn't we be providing women who are were in the workplace and want to take 3 months off to care for their children, shouldn't we be making that possible by at least giving them some support? We being the government?
Yeah. I mean, I think that when we talk about paid leave, I think it's really important to talk about what already exists and where the holes are. Because you're right, there are too many people who fall through the cracks of our paid leave system, and we should be trying to find ways to help, especially low-income women who don't have resources, don't have jobs that provide paid time off. We all want them to be able to take time off after they have a new baby or for other legitimate family purposes. But I think we also make sure we don't disrupt. We do have a lot of people out there. I bet most listeners, if you are working, if you have a job, most private employers provide paid time off. There's a lot of people out there who are happy with their existing benefit structures, and I think we should make sure that we don't disrupt that, because I do think there's a real fear. Because a lot of people will end up being worse off, and we've seen this.
Wait a minute, Carrie. You're saying that if Joe Biden's plan passes and women get 12 weeks of 3/4 of their regular salary, but they're getting it from the government instead of their employer, during that time that they're off work, the employer is not hurt by this. They don't have to pay the employee, and they don't have to pay the government. They just have to figure out what to do for 12 weeks while that person is home with their kids. Yeah, and I don't know if most employers, I think you're right, offer some sort of paid leave, although about half of America's employers, certainly low-income employers, offer nothing or very little. But typically the most you get is a couple of weeks. Why not blow up 2 weeks and replace it with 12 weeks? It doesn't make any sense what you're saying.
Well, to start with, I bet Tom, I think that you do need to be careful in making assumptions. Because one thing that you've seen is we talk about 3/4 of pay, which is about what would be replaced.
Right.
There are a lot of people out there who right now have 6 weeks off. I'm a small employer. I employ about 20 women. I have people. It's all women. We have a lot of people have babies, and we provide 6 weeks off at full pay.
That's unusual.
And then we.
Congratulations on you, but that's unusual. If you worked at McDonald's, you would not be getting 6 weeks off with pay.
Sure.
Or at Walmart.
Absolutely. If I worked at McDonald's or Walmart, if you worked at McDonald's or Walmart, if you are a low income, and we absolutely, Tom, I'm 100% with you when we talk about trying to help low income folks have better support systems. But let's remember, right now there's state paid leave, there are government paid leave programs in several states, and that covers something like 1/4 of all workers are already covered by a state paid leave system.
In blue states.
We do need to be. Fine, in blue states, fine, but do you...
So what about the poor women in red states? Carrie, you're a conservative.
Okay, fine, and I do think...
How many employers do you think in Mississippi and Alabama offer anything?
There's a lot of, Tom, you need to, if you look at the data, if you look at the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, most people do have access to paid time off. It's not always sufficient, and we do need to find more ways to help people. But something you should be real careful about is looking at, can you please let me finish and just let me make one quick point.
Yeah.
So if you look at the state paid leave programs, what you will find is that it is almost overwhelmingly, it is people who are higher income are much more likely to take the benefits than people who have lower income.
Right.
This is also the same in Europe, because if you're just getting by, having something that provides 3/4 of your pay is you can't take off that time. So in California, they've found, because remember, this money comes from somewhere, and the way that it's paid for is by a payroll tax. So let's remember that every single worker will be paying a payroll tax on every dollar they earn. So every worker will be paying for this. Those who take it will be taking money out. But what we've seen, and this is actually, there's interesting studies about what happened to the EU, and they've found that it is a transfer of wealth from poor to rich because of who ends up taking it. Your higher income folks are more likely to make use of the benefits. I think we should be fine. Let's talk about solving the problems, but not. Tom, I can send you the link. There's a lot of very interesting research. It's the same in Rhode Island, and California, and New Jersey.
I think, and I'm sure you can find, anecdotal evidence of that. That may be the exception that proves the rule. But the bottom, what we're talking about here is every developed country in the world except the United States provides government-supported paid leave for people, for women who are, you know, and many of them for husbands too. If you know, if they want to be the caregiver, you know, or and this isn't just for children. This is also for bereavement, for people being victims of sexual assault or domestic violence, for a loved one's military deployment. We're saying, you know, let's join the rest of the world and give that spouse, give that partner, give that family 12 weeks
every year
of space.
For essentially any reason. You know, you can't be like, everybody should not work for 3 months every year.
It's not every
you know, here's
reason.
the thing, Tom.
These are the reasons why people take time off.
But here's something you should know, and I do think that people should be careful of what they wish for, especially women out there, because you're right. Women in Europe do enjoy tremendous family benefits, but you know what? They also have larger wage gaps, and they are much less likely than American women to be in management.
That has nothing to do with this.
As an employer. No, yes, it does. The OECD, come to visit us at IWF.org. You will see links both on the redistributional effects of paid leave programs, which show that it hurts poor people and helps rich people. And then also it looks at, in the OECD countries, women are much less likely to reach upper management. And as somebody, if you actually are thinking about hiring somebody for a job of responsibility, if you think a childbearing year woman or a woman with a bunch of kids, like me, I got 5 kids, I have a lot of reasons to take off. My kids are sick a lot. You know, there's a lot of things that go wrong. A lot of employers, if they knew that any time I might take off 3 months for one of these reasons, they're not going to give me a position of authority. You know, big companies may be able to.
It covers men as well as women, Carrie.
But men don't use it as much, Tom. And they don't use it in EU. They don't use it in the EU as much, and they wouldn't use it here as much, and employers will know it.
Yeah, well,
so
that's a whole completely separate issue. I mean, if that's the side effect of this, and it's widespread, and I'm not believing it is, but you know, if that's the side effect and it's widespread, then you deal with that. But right now, we've got people who, I mean, you know, we're hurting our children, Carrie.
Do you think you think government should be paying for people who are in the top 1%?
I think that
people should be paying payroll taxes for a woman making $1 million a year.
I don't think that a woman making $1 million. Sure, yeah. See, this is your argument. You know, oh, should Charles Koch get Social Security? Yes, he should.
1%.
Yes, he's a billionaire.
Are you kidding? Yeah.
Yes,
well,
of course.
That's
why it's called an entitlement. Everyone's entitled to it.
For the ultra wealthy.
There you go, Carrie Lucas. Hang on just a second, Carrie.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Carrie Lewis with the Independent Women's Forum, IWF.org. You can check it out, and you can tweet her at Carrie Lucas. Thanks, Carrie. Okay. And welcome back. Debating Carrie is always interesting. It's always fun. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I kind of wish I could have gotten on with her. You know, as you were talking about Mississippi and having, you know, any benefits from any of the companies, stinginess was spreading diseases 100 years ago with Typhoid Mary.
That's right. She went to work.
Yeah, there was no unemployment. There was no disability insurance. And as I understand it, she was very uneducated, and she only had one skill, and that was working in a restaurant. And she was a carrier. She had typhoid, but she was not displaying any symptoms. As I understand it, throughout her whole life, she never showed any of the symptoms, but she was definitely a carrier. And so she would get a job in a restaurant, get all the customers sick and dying, and the health department of New York City would track her down and get her fired, but she still was, you know, no unemployment, no social safety net, and so she'd find another restaurant, and she just kept spreading the disease.
Yeah.
And so stinginess is expensive. And for, you know, Independent Women's Forum, I take it that they call themselves conservative.
Yes.
Well, a conservative, especially a fiscal conservative, realizes that disability insurance, sick leave, is not something to play with. it's definitely a stabilizing aspect of any civilization.
You would think.
And yeah, I mean, there are just so many of these phony conservatives that I was just trying to look up that Independent Women's Forum to find out if it's a Koch brothers. Yeah, as a matter of fact, yeah. Here's how Charles Koch's radical free market ideology is contributing to America's disastrous response to COVID. It talks about Independent Women's Forum. Yeah. So she's just a front person for the Koch brothers.
Yeah, well, and the entire Republican Party, by the way. I mean, the arguments that Kerry is making are the arguments that are being made right now in the House and in the Senate by Republicans against this legislation. And
you know, I got on a right-wing show the other day asking whether or not we should yank the corporate charter of the Republican Party because they do no social good.
Yeah.
They, you remember whether it's radio or 501c3, a nonprofit status, you have to provide some good to the community. You know, there's no reason for us to give a tax break to an organization.
Yeah, the GOP is a nonprofit corporation, isn't it? Lose their nonprofit
right.
status at least.
Yeah, they have to prove some social good. Otherwise, they're just a bunch of parasites.
That's going to be a challenge.
Well, not really. You know, in a
no, I mean it's going to be a challenge for the GOP to prove that they're offering a social good.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, you know, some of the big radio stations like or radio networks like Clear Channel, Sinclair, Fox, all of these ones that basically, even their nonprofit PSAs are all big corporate chains that could be scammers.
Yeah.
There's no local broadcasting, and it's all dedicated to some.
No, I get it. And it all leads to a deep dark hole. And I'm going to be talking about that more right after the break. David, thank you for the call. The perfect setup for my next rant. Thank you. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. It's I think, as I recall, maybe it was YouTube. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video out about the 1776 Commission. Remember this commission that Donald Trump put together to explain the history of America, to have true principles, because history is being distorted by things like the New York Times 1619 report, you know. No, seriously, this is what Donald Trump said, that, you know, we're engaging now in revisionist history by highlighting the history of slavery in the United States. And so he put together this bizarre commission, and now in the state of South Carolina, Senator Dwight Loftus and others have introduced legislation requiring that Trump's commission, which had no historians on it, 18 people, not a single historian, that commission's findings be taught as history in the public schools in South Carolina. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, it's like they want to take us back to the 1930s. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, so following up on my conversation with Kerry, I wanted to share with you the ugly truth, and which is how I titled the piece that Louise and I published this morning at HartmannReport.com. The ugly truth: Republicans want more poverty and crime. Yeah, I'll just come right out and say it. The GOP is running this huge scam right now. It's the same scam they've been running since Nixon's, you know, tough on crime rhetoric. I think probably the high point of it, in terms of just being nakedly overt about it, was the George H.W. Bush administration toward the election, when he was getting desperate to try to beat Bill Clinton. And he had somebody from one of the federal agencies give some guy some cocaine in the park across the street from the White House, and then they arrested the guy. They basically set him up, or they brought him in there. I forget the details of it, but they set this guy up so that they could arrest him, so that George Bush could hold a bag of cocaine on television and complain about crime in D.C. And and then he follows that up with his infamous Willie Horton ads. Scary black guy, crime. Scary black guy, crime. This is the Republican mantra. So their formula is very simple: increase inequality and increase poverty. And you do that with massive tax cuts for rich people, which increases inequality, and slashing social services and holding down the minimum wage, which increases poverty. So you do those two things. Inequality and poverty increase crime, including violent crime. It turns out while there's a very, very clear correlation between poverty and crime, and you would get that, right? I mean, the French Revolution, people were stealing bread. Poor people stealing things because they need stuff, right? So you can understand that. But the huge association is between inequality and violent crime. I mean, this is an absolutely amazing association. But like I said, this is not a new idea, by the way. In the year 170 AD, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius said, poverty is the mother of crime. Well, the Republicans know that. So they want more crime, so they can complain about crime, and then they can say that crime is being helped along or caused or whatever by programs that Democrats do, like welfare or paid family leave, right? I mean, this is amazing. This is from the Equality Trust in the UK, Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett. They've been on this program. This is from one of their research notes. Quote, rates of violence are higher in more unequal societies. This finding holds up in many different contexts. We looked at via different methodologies, and after controlling for other determinants of crime such as low income, unemployment, and teen birth rates, small permanent decreases in inequality, such as reducing inequality from the level found in Spain to the level found in Canada, would reduce homicides by 20% and lead to a 23% long-term reduction in robberies. So, the GOP is basically running this scam. Keep people in poverty, 40% of Americans cannot deal with a $400 expense. Half of Americans can't deal with a $1,000 expense. Keep Americans poor. In fact, if anything, try to increase that poverty, which you're seeing in red state after red state right now, where Republican governors are actually cutting off people's unemployment benefits. The economy has 8 million fewer jobs in it right now than it did a year ago, and that are not going to come back. These are businesses, about a third of all restaurants have just closed permanently, for example. You've got all kinds of businesses, particularly small businesses. And about a third of giant companies, this was in the Axios newsletter this morning, about a third of giant companies are what are called zombie companies. They literally don't make enough money to pay the debt, to pay the interest on their own debt. So when interest rates go up, even by 1%, these companies are going to go bankrupt. That's a third of the major companies. So, just basically wipe out the economy, which has happened, 8 million fewer jobs, and then cut the unemployment benefits to those people. As we're seeing now, we've got 5 Republican states so far that have cut unemployment benefits or in the process of cutting unemployment benefits for people because they say people aren't willing to go back to work. Well, it's kind of a whole separate conversation, but it's not the case. There are people desperately looking for work all over the country. So this is their scam. And what you are going to see, and by the way, being the victim of crime tends to make people vote more conservatively, vote more Republican. And because the Republicans come along and say, we're going to be tough on crime. We need more cops. That's the solution to all the problems. Not, we need to deal with poverty. We need to deal with inequality. That's the Democrats' solution, right? Deal with poverty and inequality. There's a difference there's a reason why there's less crime in Norway and Denmark than there is in I'm trying to think of than Turkey, for example. Another NATO country, not an EU country, but a NATO. I called it an EU country the other day, and somebody corrected me. Thank you for that, by the way. So there's a reason. And that reason, has to do with, and that reason is that strategy that the Republican Party is using right now. Do you think they're going to get away with it next year? Hey, more crime. We need more cops.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And if we need more cops, we definitely need more Republicans, right? Yes, vote for them. Is that going to work? I'm concerned.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Black Panthers, Portraits from an Unfinished Revolution, edited by Briasha and Yohuro Williams. This is from Chapter 1, In Defense of Self-Defense, Pathways to the Black Panther Party. People joined the Black Panther Party for many different reasons. The moment of politicization was different for everyone, but a few were commonly shared, including the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and the 1965 Watts Urban Rebellion. A more general sense of frustration and alienation compelled others to join the Panthers' ranks. The party exerted an enormous pull on the imagination of the members, especially those who had experienced police brutality. In the rebellious spirit of the times, the party's bold stance on self-defense resonated with those seeking fresh alternatives for achieving social justice and black liberation. Party members expressed a deep appreciation for other aspects of the Panthers program, including its community service programs, which grew out of a genuine love for the people. My neighborhood friend, a sister that I've known since I was about 11 years old, said, "Claudia, I want you to go with me. We're going to go and hear these Panthers speak at PS 92, which was an elementary school in our community." I said, "Okay, I'll go, I'm down." I listened to these brothers speak and I heard the pitch. I saw the determination and I saw the compassion. I thought, wow, this is the feeling that I used to get when I went into clubs and popped my fingers and got on the dance floor. It was the same feeling, except it was bigger for me now. It was bigger than me. It was full of love of the people. No longer did we have to argue and fight about, what are you looking at me like that for? Or don't step on my sneaker, or this is my block. Now we really had something to fight for. We had a people to fight for. This is bigger than any gang or club. We had a goal. We had something to look forward to, which was the betterment of black people. It was most definitely something that I was searching for, but I didn't yet know what that I was searching. I didn't find it. It fell on me. That was the first meeting. That's what actually started the wheels in my mind for me to become political. I was rank and file. I did a lot of things. The easiest way to say it is just to imagine worker bees. You got one queen, everyone else works. Rank and file. Those were the worker bees. We did it all. The one thing I enjoyed the most was teaching the political education classes on 7th Avenue in front of the Harlem office. That was the most fruitful. But anything I did, it was for the love of the people. Wherever I was sent, or whatever I had to do, it didn't matter anymore because it was for the love of the people. We were trying to get the word out. If I had to sell 125 papers in a day and I got close to that goal, then I did a good job. I was originally from Queens and came out of the Corona branch of the Black Panther Party. When the Panther 21 were arrested and went to jail, in order to keep those offices open and functioning, Panthers were sent all over the city to Harlem. I was one of the Panthers that ended up in the Harlem branch. That's how I got to be there on Wednesday nights to give the PE classes, the political education classes. I was extremely nervous the first time, but once I found my voice, then it went like clockwork. A lot of the people in the community who were just walking by were like, well, let me stop and see what this little girl is talking about, because I was indeed a little girl at that time. We started off every PE class with a 10-point program, and we ended every PE class with, okay, let me hear from you guys. What do you want to see different in your community, and how are you living? Then we would get the feedback, and then we would know how to concentrate our efforts. Rent strikes were crazy, because if you had to live like that, why should you pay rent? We did clothing drives, we did food drives, we did, of course, the breakfast program. There were a lot of other things that happened, and they might have been more meaningful, but those PE classes stayed with me. We were outside on the street in front of the office. When you were giving a class or you were having a talk inside the office and there were only Panthers around you, the feeling was just different than outside on the street. The Panthers knew what you were doing because they were Panthers and they were doing the same thing. Outside, there were constant questions and answers with the people. You had to give yourself up when you were outside in that crowd. You never knew who was going to say, we don't care about that, we don't care about you, you need to go away. There were a lot of people that just did not know where we were coming from and were afraid that if they were seen in the office or if they were seen asking questions, that they'd get reprisals, that they'd end up getting hurt. They were afraid. Things went so fast. Time seems to accelerate when you're always looking over your shoulder. At this time, it was all-out war against the Panthers, and brothers are being shot down in the street or set up or going to jail for years. We have brothers in jail since that time, 40, 41 years. We've had brothers that we've lost on the inside that we can't let the world forget. The government said, okay, we're going to lock them up and throw away the key and no one will ever care. But it's not true. We want them out. We want freedom for all political prisoners. We don't want any more of them to die on the inside. That's the biggest injustice. There were times when our cadre consisted of almost nothing but women, and that was when the brothers were locked up or had to go underground. I remember being on a front line against a policeman on horseback and being 6 months pregnant. What we wanted was a simple street light, and we got the community out there and we blocked traffic. I didn't know whether I was going to be trampled, my baby killed, but I knew I had to be there. I was an active member of the party from 1968 to 1971, and in those few years, I aged 10, 15 years. We didn't have much time to be little girls. We went straight to womanhood. Talking about these things is bringing up all of these feelings, though I hadn't thought about or touched on them for a long time. It seems that as you get older and you look back on the things that you've done in your life, you say, oh my God, I could have gotten killed then. When you're young, fear is not really in your vocabulary, and once you look back, you wonder, why wasn't I afraid? We didn't have much time to be afraid. It was all about survival. The Black Panthers.
So, you know, we have our regular newsletter that you can find over at thomhartmann.com that has Sue's Daily Stack in it, which lists a link to every article, every story that I talked about on, whatever it may be on the program that day. And then there's also my daily rant, which can come into your email box, no advertisements, no cost, over at hartmannreport.com. In addition to that, we have a weekly video that we post over at thomhartmann.com. For people who, are supporters of our program. And the one this week is particularly fascinating. A federal judge has said that Betsy DeVos has to come in and sit for a 3-hour deposition. Now, the Biden Justice Department said former cabinet secretary shouldn't have to do this. And the judge said, no, the record keeping was so shoddy during the Trump administration. So what's up next? Well, let's hope it's Bill Barr being dragged before a court. You can check it all out at thomhartmann.com. Alaska. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, are the Republicans going to get away with it? Are they going to block any kind of, family leave? Because, somehow that's going to benefit rich people. I don't quite get why Republicans are using that as a talking point if they're talking to Republicans. But in any case, is that going to happen? And are they going to succeed in this whole, oh my God, there's more crime in America hysteria, and therefore we need more cops, we need more Republicans, we need more, crime in America hysteria. So, who knows? Who knows? Anyway, Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind?
Hey, you should give yourself a pat on the back because we had a conversation about 3 weeks ago talking about a lottery for vaccinations. Mm-hmm. And about 6 states are either considering it or have already implemented the program, and they've already given out $1 million to one winner.
Yeah, that was in Ohio.
Yeah, so I think that your program is directly responsible for making Americans, turning them into millionaires, and you should be proud.
Well, thank you, Larry. I suspect that I'm not the only person who thought of that or was advocating. In fact, I'm sure of it, but appreciate the tip of the hat.
When I called your radio program, I called it because I hadn't heard anybody talking about it, and that was a week before Ohio brought their program.
Well, then we should be crediting you, Larry.
A week after that, 2 other states did it, and then now it's in the 3rd week, and it's almost doubled.
We're doing it here in Oregon. Yeah.
Yeah. So each week it seems to be doubling as more and more states. And to my knowledge, it happened on your show first.
Okay. Larry, is that what you called about?
I called about the Democrats that I think are missing out on an opportunity. They should be drawing Republicans into a debate on increasing taxes on the rich.
Mm-hmm.
Never in our history has an increase in taxes on the rich caused a recession. Now, we have countless times when cutting taxes for the rich causes a recession. And the main reason why is because when you give rich people tax money, more breaks, they don't spend it. But if you increase taxes on the rich, and then you use that money for infrastructure, for hiring teachers, hiring cops, hiring people all over the country, then you end up with Americans in mass making more money, and they spend that money in stores owned by the rich.
You're absolutely right. And in fact, I keep getting callers who are setting up my next segment. That is going to be the topic of our conversation with Richard Wolff at the top of the next hour. So Larry's spot on, and thank you. You've nailed it. And your economic analysis is always just great. Lee in Greenville, South Carolina. Lee, listening on Sirius XM, it says you want to disagree with me. What am I missing here?
Well, I want to disagree with you. You were talking about the poverty and the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Where I live, there are unbelievable amounts of jobs available, and people are laying their big butt collecting unemployment instead of going out and taking these jobs. And I see it in person all the time. Some restaurants can't open because why? Nobody go.
No, it's because they're paying $2.50 an hour plus tips, and you have to expose yourself to fools who are trying to run around without masks on when the COVID is still around. Lee, come on.
Stop the nonsense. You come on. They are paying big dollars for this. They're advertising $13 an hour to come to work in these restaurants plus tips. Yeah. Well, how much do you think they ought to pay and stay in business? Stay out of business and not offer jobs? That's not bad money.
Lee, it is not the money. It's not the money.
Well, that's what you're talking about.
It is not the money. What you have right now, you have a situation in the United States where the majority of people who are not returning to the workforce are women. And the reason they're not returning to the workforce is because the schools are not open, and because we don't subsidize daycare, and that goes back to COVID. You've got this is.
Stop it.
Oh, look at the statistics, Lee.
For a minute.
I have been listening to you for a minute. I'm telling you, there's two major reasons why people are not returning to work. Number one, women are not returning to work because they've got to care for their kids. And number two, a whole spectrum of people are not returning to work, even if they themselves are vaccinated, because vaccines aren't 100% effective against preventing COVID infections. And we're still getting 30, 40,000 new infections a day in this country. And people don't want to be in these frontline kinds of jobs where their customers are breathing on them, particularly in a restaurant where they take their masks off. Would you?
Oh, stop it. Yes, I do. We're open down here, and there's no increase in COVID. And women ought to be home with their kids and let their husbands get off their butts and
there we go.
And take care of them.
There we go.
No, there we go. There we go. We don't need more welfare.
Finally, if you want...
You be quiet for a minute and let me talk. From the Great Society program, I have
Great Society program cut poverty in half in the United States in 10 years.
No, it didn't increase it. I see the.
It absolutely did. I'm sorry, Lee. You might see poverty.
I've traveled all my life, and I've seen the poverty programs. They don't work. Are you still there?
I am. So if we have poverty programs that don't work, Lee, why don't we replace them with what we know does work? What Franklin Roosevelt did after the Republican Great Depression, why don't we replace them with guaranteed jobs?
We don't have to have guaranteed jobs. We have capitalism. Go out and get a job. We have jobs down here all over South Carolina. Nobody wants to get in these great
people will be taking those great jobs when they can feel safe in the workplace and when they can put their kids back in daycare or back in school. This is a temporary situation.
Stay home and take care of your family in the house.
I got it. Lee, we're starting to repeat ourselves here, so I'm going to move along. Audrey in Chicago. Hey, Audrey, what's up? By the way, Lee, thank you for the call. Hi, Audrey.
God bless you, Tom, for your patience with that. A parent. He sounds like a male chauvinist, quite frankly. I don't know if that's what he is, but he sounds like a male chauvinist. And what a catch-22 he created there. They need to get up off their butts and work, but they need to stay home with the kids. Just really, who wins? Where do we win? But my primary, the reason why I called was in response to Ms. Lucas's comments. You know, the reason why they use this tactic where, okay, so you want the rich, you want the wealthier workers to have access to this benefit too? Yes. And let's face facts here, their comments are disingenuous oftentimes, because if they truly cared about the lower paid workers, about low wage workers, first and foremost, they would stop fighting against the existence of the minimum wage laws. Period. Yep. Secondly, they would stop fighting against the raising of the minimum wage law rates to a living wage rate. Yep. We are being kind by asking them or demanding of them to raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour. We're being kind. The statistics are showing that in a lot of places in this country, it costs more. We would need workers would need to be paid more than that. I think some averages about $22 per hour. In order to be able to afford the cost of living above the line of poverty. If they truly care about low-wage workers and the benefit programs available to them and how we can benefit them, they would stop fighting against workers' rights. They would stop fighting against minimum wage laws. They would stop fighting against the raising of minimum wage. They would stop fighting against including child care and pre-kindergarten education as part of infrastructure. They would stop fighting against they would stop fighting against including the internet as part of infrastructure. That's the way we communicate. It's my understanding, because I was in the military from 88 to 96, that we came up with that. We came up with the internet as an alternative form of communication just in case the phone lines went down.
Yep, it was DARPA
infrastructure. If they truly cared about low-wage workers and our rights and protections, then these people would stop trying to disenfranchise their fellow American citizens who are low-wage workers in the voting booths. This mess, this fraud, as they're calling it in Arizona, this is part of their fight of trying to disenfranchise working people. These people want they want a group of people who constantly and uninterruptedly exist below the protections of the Constitution.
Yeah, that was the point of my piece, Audrey. The Republicans want crime and poverty. They want that. They campaign on it. Audrey, your rant was brilliant. Thank you so much for the call. Thanks for listening to us on WCPT. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Doesn't happen often, but sometimes my callers say it better than I can. Brilliant. We'll be right back. 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Let's see here. Leo in Portland. Hey, Leo, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm torn on this subject because I'm not on the side of the far right where unless you're a multimillionaire, we don't care about you and you and your family can starve in the streets. But I'm not on the far left side of, let me give you an analogy of, I think that there's too many people in the world. I think that there's an environmental problem, and the way we use taxes to guide society with smoking or cigarette taxes, gasoline taxes, alcohol taxes, I've never understood why we use taxes to give to families that have more and more kids. And the new Biden bill that gives monthly payments, a huge monthly payments to, no matter how big your family is, you get that payment for the more kids you have, the more money you get. Right. And it just seems like it should be the other way around. And I wish that we would focus more on like a rising tide lifts all ships, focus more on overall programs that, like free education for everyone would, you know what, raise families out of poverty, raise kids out of poverty. You know,
we have free education for everyone up to 12th
raising the minimum
grade.
wage would help everyone. You know, it wouldn't be.
No, I get all that, Leo, but in the context of this debate about 12 weeks of paid family leave, we are literally the only country in the world whose government, developed country in the world, whose government does not offer paid family leave. And it's not just for having children. It's for if your spouse dies and you need to go through a period of bereavement, or your child, or somebody very, very close to you. If you become seriously ill, if your spouse becomes seriously ill and you need to become a caregiver for a while, there are these extraordinary circumstances. Childbirth is just one of them. And I really don't think, and there's a good body of research that has looked at this issue, that Republican talking points notwithstanding, that women want to get pregnant and have babies so they can then get generous welfare benefits. Turns out that's complete BS. That the welfare benefits are not generous enough, that anybody is having babies for economic reasons. People are typically having babies because they're not using birth control. And that goes back to a lack of sex education in our schools, and that goes back to Bill Bennett in the 1980s, making sex education optional in our public schools, and where it still is, and making it harder and harder to get birth control. I mean, I just think that we need to decouple the economic arguments from the too many people arguments, because there's very little evidence that indicates that anybody is having babies for an economic purpose.
Right, and I'm not preaching the welfare queen with the Mercedes.
Right. No, I get
point.
it. I get it.
I'm just thinking that they do benefit indirectly. I don't think that they're purposely having kids to make money. But I do think
I agree with you, Leo, that there's too many people in the world, and it's a problem. And I think the way we deal with that is you empower women and you make birth control available, widely. But Leo, I got to run. But thanks for thoughtful conversation. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So with some fancy footwork math, you can take the GDP of the United States, the productivity, the amount of wealth that is produced, or goods and services that are produced every year by American workers, and divide it by the number of workers, and what you get is that the average worker in America is producing about $75 an hour worth of value for their employer. And the minimum wage pays them about 10% of that value. Now, back in 1950, the minimum wage paid 30% of the value of the productivity that the average worker is producing for their employer. If we took the minimum wage up to $15 an hour tomorrow, it would still be in the neighborhood of 20%. So there's a strong case for increasing the minimum wage based on history. I lay this all out in the new video that we have just for our people who are supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. 9 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you and Kimberly in Houston, Texas. Hey, Kimberly, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm sorry. I'm a little nervous. It's nice to speak with you, though. I listen to you every day.
Thank you. Nice to hear from you.
You're welcome. I'm just calling in. Your subject is really close to me. Just really quickly, I was in oil and gas for over 25 years, working in the oil and gas industry, until COVID happened, and we were laid off. So I was doing well, had savings, contributing to the economy like everyone else. And I had to actually live off of my own savings the first 3 or 4 months because unemployment here in Texas was so hard to get. So, yeah, so I had savings, thankfully. And I'm looking for work every day, Tom. I'm not a lazy person. I'm not sitting and waiting for this unemployment or the extra $300, which, by the way, Abbott is cutting off. So there are a lot of us who want to work. We're looking for work every day. And I made a lot more money also working than I ever did with this unemployment.
Sure.
So, yeah, I just wanted to let you know that. I just hate hearing when
So what are your
people call
thoughts,
in.
Kimberly, on this argument that, you know, there's lots of minimum wage jobs essentially, or low wage jobs, let's say, you know, below $15 an hour kind of jobs out there. And yet, you know, there are in some parts of the country people who are saying, you know, I'm not going to work for that.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely. Like I said, I have a mortgage. I have bills. At
$12 an hour, then you just end up still running backwards rather than forwards. You would sink deeper and deeper into the morass.
I would actually not make it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would not make it. I have a mortgage. I have bills. I'm almost finished with. I went back to school. Almost finished putting myself through school for my degree. Thank you. And I tell you, Tom, I need to make a livable wage, bottom line.
Yep.
And that's how so many people that I speak with that are going through this right now, you want to make a livable wage or you won't be able to afford the roof over your head, food on the table, or anything if you don't make a livable wage. Who doesn't want to make a livable wage?
And there's 8 million jobs that are gone now from the economy forever, and probably
mine was one of them.
Yeah, and probably several million of them, maybe, I don't know if it's the majority or not, were not minimum wage jobs. They were good jobs like you had, Kimberly, that paid people enough that they could kind of step into the middle class and buy a house and have a mortgage.
There you go.
And now those jobs are gone, and the answer that the Republicans have is, well, you know, just sell the house, you know, rent a cheap apartment and go to work for $12 an hour or $10 an hour.
That is not going to work for everyone.
You bet.
You would see more homeless people.
Yep.
I'm just going to be honest with you, and it breaks my heart to see it, and I'm so grateful. But there are a lot of people. It's kind of scary being in this position. I've never wanted to be at the mercy of the government. I worked every day. I'm okay with people who need the subsidies and the assistance temporarily. I'm okay with that. But I was working every day, so I'm not one of those lazy people. And I know so many people that they're not lazy. They want to work. We want to work. But we need to make a livable wage so we can maintain our lives.
Yep.
And I think that's what any human being would want.
And I think that's why why Joe Biden's American Jobs Plan, you know, the first part of his infrastructure bill, well, both parts are so critical because what he's talking about is union jobs. And union jobs are not $12 an hour jobs. They're, you know, I mean, occasionally they are, but generally speaking, he's talking about bringing back good wage jobs to America.
Yes.
And, you know, for every time I hear a Republican squealing about, oh, nobody wants to take this job, you know, I'm like, well, let's, you know, if our economy, do we have an economy? The bottom line question here, Kimberly, I think is the economy here to serve us, or are we here to serve the economy? And, you know, I'll go all the way back to Adam Smith in 1776. Basically, what he was saying is the economy exists to serve us. We created the economy through our government. You know, we create the infrastructure for it, the rules for it. But Republicans and conservatives keep saying, oh, no. You are here to serve the economy. You should be taking this $7.50 an hour job because, you know, it's, you know, we are establishing the rules of the economy and you're here to serve those rules. I just think it's wrong.
Yeah. And real quick, Tom, if they're complaining at the same time about poverty, right? but then you're cutting the unemployment benefits.
That's right.
For people
That's right.
who need them temporarily.
Which is increasing poverty, which then increases crime, and then they start yelling about crime, right? Republicans. We're going to vote Republican. It's nuts. Kimberly, I got to run, but thank you. Thank you. Great conversation. I appreciate it. And thank you. Brilliant first call. We're hitting the top of the hour here. We'll be back with Professor Richard Wolff right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book for today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I have grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue their idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with the low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others. These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it. And I have yet to meet someone who is an expert at all of it, not even close. Every view of an incident is informed by the reviewer, what he sees, what her level of expertise is, and that changes over time. It's like asking someone who lives in the plaza to describe Manhattan. The book is Kingdom of Lies by Kate Fazzini.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. 6 minutes past the hour. It's Thom Hartmann with you, and on the line with us, it's Thursday. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, also now available as an ebook. Democracyatwork.info, rdwolf with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at ProfWolf. With 2 Fs. Don't forget the 2 Fs. Professor Wolff, welcome back. So glad to have you with us. I forwarded to you an Axios newsletter this morning. It was talking about how, one of the problems with our economy is that when wealthy people make money or make more money, they don't spend it into the economy, so it doesn't stimulate the economy. Whereas when poor people run out of money, they can no longer spend it in the economy, and they're the ones that hold the economy up. I'm wondering your thoughts on how important that concept is, B, why more Americans don't get it, C, what we can do about this.
It's very important. Americans don't get it because of the teachers who teach us economics, either in the school or in the public arena or in the media, don't explain it well enough or often enough, and the solution is terribly easy. Let me explain. I was among most of the students in my classes in economics as I went through the university who figured out, partly by what the teachers did tell us, that the following sentence is true. The poorer you are, the more likely you are to take any money that comes your way and spend it because you're barely getting by. That's what it means to be poor. So the government knows that to give money to middle or lower income people is to have that money plowed right back into the economy, purchasing goods and services. Whereas if you are rich, you are probably already living pretty well, pretty high off the proverbial hog, and you will likely do a good bit of saving, of not spending whatever extra money you get since you're already rich. The reason this is important is that if you have an economic problem, as we do, and the government wants to step in and do something about it, which is what the leaders of our country say they want to do, then the logical priority would be to give the most money to the people at the bottom. And that's why I can explain to you why Americans don't know it, because the folks at the top do not want an economic policy that would, heaven forbid, tax them on the grounds that they have it and then pass it out to the people at the bottom because they would do more to stimulate the economy than giving it to people at the top. And what can we do about it? Easy. Change the policy mix. Make the policies go where not only is the need greatest, that is in the middle and lower levels of our income, but also where the economic punch will be the greatest. Every dollar you give, and there's plenty of studies that show it, every dollar you give to the lower half of the population produces many dollars of spending by those people and everybody they spend on who's likewise like them and therefore likely to take that money and spend it again. So it's really a simple lesson of the way a capitalist economy works, but we don't act on it because those at the top do not want to go where the logic here points.
And most of this conversation that you and I have been having has been in the context of government policy that would be supportive of working class people and poor people. Things that would support them that they would otherwise have to pay for, things like health care or education, child care, things like that. But let's put this in the context also of wages. In the previous hour, I had a conservative caller who was just all bent out of shape by the fact that in South Carolina, where he lived, there were help wanted signs, and people were saying, I'm not willing to work for $12 an hour or $10 an hour or whatever. I used to have a good job, and I've got a mortgage now, and I can't afford to work for that kind of wage. Talk about, and so it seems to me that what that situation is going to do. We've lost 8 million jobs that are not coming back now because so many businesses have just shuttered, and other businesses have figured, hey, this is a great excuse or opportunity to tighten up our operations and shed some people between those two things. Is it not possible that this shortage of workers, shall we say, euphemistically, is going to drive up wages, which is going to stimulate the economy, which is going to help all of us?
Yeah, it's always been a mystery to me, Tom. We have this phrase that Americans know called Trickle-Down Economics. Right. The idea being you should have a policy giving money to the people at the top, which is indeed what we mostly have, and we shouldn't object because it will trickle down.
the people at the top will take the money and they will hire the rest of us and all of that. You very rarely hear trickle-up economics, which makes much more sense because we know that if you give money to the people at the bottom, they'll spend it. And precisely as you said, we don't know anything of the sort by giving money to people at the top. And yet, trickle-down economics is a common phrase. Trickle-up, when I articulate it, has people raise their eyebrows wondering, what I'm talking about. And raising wages is the best possible trickle-up economics you can do. Because, again, you know that people, particularly those earning under $15 an hour these days, are people who are on the very edge, cannot save anything, will spend every nickel they have because the cost of living requires no less. And look, it's no achievement if what we do is starve out the mass of our people, force them to work at $10 or $11 or $12 an hour because you've taken away, as 21 states now have done, the extra $300 that was supposed to help them through the worst public health disaster in a century. I mean, what kind of a society does that, and what kind of a life are you giving to those people to whom you are saying work for very little, live on next to nothing, or will make it even worse for you? This is a society that has lost the ability to take care of huge portions of its population, and the social and long-term historical costs of that outweigh all these other considerations.
Yeah, and I mean, just consider the damage done to children of growing up in poverty. I mean, it's truly mind-boggling. So, are you seeing, we have about a minute and a half left, Professor Wolf, are you seeing in this so-called worker shortage an actual optimistic sign? I think I am. That was the point I was trying to make.
Well, I think there's an element of that. I wish that were all there was. Yes, there are people who are saying we've now gone through really hell and back here with this COVID, with the economic crash at the same time. We're not about to go and come out of the other end of that with an awful job, awful circumstances, bad pay, poor benefits. It's really outrageous to impose that on us at the same time that the billionaires in our country have gotten much richer. I mean, there is a kind of protest here, and I certainly celebrate that. But I'm also, and I can't say this in a nice way, I'm depressed at the very thought that something like this is serious policy. I just read a statistic that half of the retail stores scheduled to be open this year in 2021 will be in the dollar chain, Dollar General, Family Dollar. These are the stores for the poorest of the poor. That's the only place this economy now thinks it can grow. And that is a statement that ought to make everyone, including those at the top of this society, sit up and take notice.
That is mind-boggling. And you said 21 states now have cut off unemployment benefits?
That's right. 21 states have taken away the extra $300 purely to force those people to go to work at jobs that they do not want and should not be forced to take.
Incredible. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, Prof. Wolf on Twitter. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
With more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Ann in Alameda, California. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I was listening to the gal who was talking about family leave and
Carrie
other
Lucas.
benefits. Yeah, I lived in Italy for 25 years, and they had the benefits that you've been talking about. But the conversation was about what they were doing in France. The French government, the leaders of the society, realized, and I'm talking 50 or more years ago, that French women were not having enough babies. They were headed for demographic decline, and they were worried about demographic decline. Now, French industry could, they have all these former colonies in Africa. So you could import workers from Morocco or Algeria or wherever, or Sierra Leone, Senegal. They all spoke French, but they wouldn't be French if you are picking up the part can't say out loud.
Right.
So they were all worried about French women not having enough babies, so they put in all kinds of what we would think of as super progressive policies, paying families and the daycare and the whole bunch of policies. If you position this discussion right, you could have every right-winger in the country screaming about daycare centers.
Oh, so in other words, the French were saying, we're not having enough white babies. I mean, let's just say this
Don't say
clearly.
that part out loud.
Right. We're not having enough white babies, and so we need to put into place all kinds of social subsidies rather than bring immigrants into the country, because we're going to start seeing a decline in our population, and we view that as a negative thing.
Don't say that out loud.
In the whites among the white supremacist message boards, you will find people who will just come right out and say that the reason that they are opposed to abortion is because white women are because the white population is not growing fast enough in America, and that and in fact there are discussions trying to figure out, well, how do you keep abortion legal for black people and not for white people? And I mean, weird stuff like this. They're actually is like having like pseudo-intellectual discussions about this. Maybe we could make it legal in the cities, and make it harder to get in the rural areas, and which is actually what they're doing. That's fascinating. It's fascinating.
It's all about daycare centers and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I'm not willing to racialize the debate here in the United States in order to get conservatives on our side. I get it that the French did it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Marine Le Pen may become president. It's kind of unfortunate. Although I think that they're getting a lot of outside interference via Facebook and other social media, but remarkable stuff. Ann, thank you for that. And
you're welcome.
Yeah, good talking with you. Thanks, and thanks
Great
for
show.
thank you. And you're hearing it from somebody who lived in Europe for 25 years. That's Ann, who just called. And it is actually part of the conversation here in the United States, and it's fascinating, in a way, that the economic conservatives are winning the argument in Republican circles over the racial conservatives. And I wonder how long that's going to last. At what point is Trump going to come out and say, yes, we need more of these programs so that we have more white babies? Oh, God. I think, implicitly he's already said it. But anyhow, it's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. We'll continue the conversation and more right after this. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at ThomHartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at HartmannReport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com and at HartmannReport.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot of economic news. The Clean Energy Act, which will ultimately become part of the American Jobs Plan, which is, the infrastructure plan, the way that the Democrats are putting these things together, like the way that they put together the COVID relief plan, I think that was called the American Rescue Plan. They're coming up with these, the Biden administration's coming up with these names for these programs that always end in the word plan. I think it's kind of cool. It's a great branding exercise. I'm so glad to see Democrats actually engaging in branding. But so the COVID relief, the American Rescue Plan, the COVID relief one that has already passed, was actually, what they did was they took a whole bunch of pieces of legislation, individual bills, that dealt with individual issues that had already gone through committee in the House of Representatives, had already been vetted, basically. The committees and they'd already passed the committee, and they had already passed the House of Representatives, almost all of them, and just died in the Senate. And so when they needed a piece of legislation quick, what they did is they took a whole bunch of pieces, a whole bunch of other pieces of legislation, smaller pieces, combined them all together into one giant bill and said, here you go, here's the American Rescue Plan. Well, they are planning to do the same thing with the American Jobs Plan. They are passing these pieces, and they're hard at work doing this in the House of Representatives, and they've got this deadline coming up, of the holiday, the summer holiday. Congress takes off, I think it's 7 or 8 weeks, something like that. We can't have paid family leave, but Congress sure does get, a couple of months off. Anyway, don't get me started on that. So what they're doing is they're passing the pieces. And they just yesterday passed a really important piece of this. Mark Sumner wrote about it over at Daily Kos with the headline, Clean Energy for America Act passed out of committee with a $12,500 credit for electric vehicles. This is cool. They are reversing the incentives. Right now, we give tax dollars, your tax dollars, my tax dollars, and of course the borrowed money that our country also operates on. We are taking that money and giving it to the fossil fuel industry. We are giving it to them as cash. We are giving it to them as massive tax breaks. We're giving it to them as tax incentives. We're giving it to them in just a whole variety of ways. And so what this piece of legislation is called the Clean Energy for America Act, but it's going to become part of the American Jobs Plan, right? But what this piece does is it ends those fossil fuel subsidies. We're talking billions of dollars a year. Now you can understand why, fossil fuel companies and Charles Koch, a fossil fuel billionaire, other fossil fuel billionaires, big companies, even though they're getting whacked by now their shareholders and of course the whole thing in Shell, with the Royal Dutch Shell, with the Dutch government, basically their Supreme Court saying you've got to cut your emissions by 45% by the end of the decade, which is all great news. But now you get why these conservatives are so hysterical about stopping the American Jobs Plan, the infrastructure bill. They're going to do everything they can to block this thing. And it's going to get really hot in the next week or two. Why? Because this piece of it is going to take billions, perhaps hundreds of billions, certainly over a period of a decade, hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money that would have just been given to the fossil fuel industry. It's going to take it away from the fossil fuel industry or stop giving it to them and instead use that money to subsidize clean energy. If you buy an all-electric vehicle, they're going to restore this tax incentive. There's going to be a base rebate of $7,500. If you buy an all-electric vehicle that was made in the United States, there's an additional $2,500 tax credit that you get. And these are tax credits, by the way. This comes right off your taxes at the end of the year. This doesn't come off your income. This is not a deduction. This is a credit. Tax credits are hugely more useful to taxpayers, to average middle-class taxpayers, than our tax deductions. So there's an additional $2,500 tax credit if the car is made in the United States, and then there's a third $2,500 tax credit if you buy an all-electric car. Now, this is on top of the $7,500 base credit, on top of the $2,500 made in the United States. There's a third $2,500 that you get as a tax credit if that car was manufactured using union labor. another reason why these non-union, employers, the Walmarts of the world, the Amazons of the world, the Coke Industries of the world, these non-union employers are also going to be lobbying against this. Oh my God, you're giving people a tax credit of $2,500 for simply buying a car made with union labor? That's going to encourage more union labor. We can't have that. It's amazing. Oh, and by the way, it doesn't apply to vehicles, to luxury vehicles. If the car you're thinking of buying costs more than 80 grand, no tax credit for you. So, the electric Hummers, yes, they're coming out with electric Hummers. They don't qualify for this. But, normal people, average people, everyday cars, it's great. I'll pick up your calls after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's talk media for the sane among us, and we'll be back with your thoughts on my thoughts and on the news of the day right after this. I have a geeky science for you a little later, too.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, "In light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air." End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, we've got a lot on the table here to talk about. There's a lot going on in the world, it seems, right now. But let me pick up your phone calls here. Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, what's on your mind today?
Hey, buddy Tom. Thanks for taking my call. What I wanted to do was discuss the two, what I would say, conservative earlier callers about who were, trying to discuss about why people are not going back to work and they're lazy and they're, not taking these low-paying minimum scale jobs. And what I wanted to address to them, if they're still listening, in the inner city as compared to usually in the white neighborhoods, our quality of education is is quite a bit less than what they are used to giving to their children. So that means that we can't necessarily qualify always for the better jobs because we start off in the hole. We don't have inherited wealth like they did because of slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and so on and so forth. We were unable to afford to grow our wealth above the wealth that our parents had. So we still were left in a hole. And so these guys are in the bubble of the right-wing talk radio because they are spilling exactly what they hear from right-wing talk radio, and they are not listening to what you are saying and the rationale that you are giving for why we need to have these certain things, because they have bought into this line of thinking that they hear day in and day out, and anything foreign from that, they're just not going to accept, Tom. But I'm glad you're trying to address it, and us of us on the left need to hear your argument so that if we ever engage with them, then we can try to dissuade them. But I worked, then I'm going to sign off of this. I worked with what I call Trump voters for about 40 years. Mm-hmm. And I know that it's hard to penetrate that bubble when they have been taught day in and day out a certain ideology, a certain philosophy. But I appreciate that you're out here, waging the good fight. Okay, Tom?
Yeah, and let me, Earl, if I may, let me just, you said, from your point of view, you said these things very eloquently. I'd like to toss it back at you, what I think were the two main points that you made. From my point of view, or, in my words, basically the same thing. And reality check it. See if you think that what I'm saying is accurate, because what I'm talking about here is the black community, and that's what you called and specifically said. Hey, let's talk about this. Number one, the reason why schools are not as good in many black communities and many poor white communities as well, but let's keep this with us right now, is because of the property tax. It's because of the way we fund schools. And the property tax as a way of funding schools is something we came up with in the 1890s and really, cemented all across the country by the 1920s as public schools went national. And the reason for it was that the legislators who were making these decisions were all white, and they were all wealthy, and they wanted to make sure that wealthy communities had good schools and poor communities didn't. They didn't want people to have an opportunity to climb out of poverty because poverty was very useful to them. So my first point is that we've got to, if we want to solve the school problem, we've got to solve this crazy idea that, poor communities that don't have a lot of property tax revenue shouldn't have crappy schools. In fact, it should be the exact opposite. They should be the ones that we should be pouring money into their schools. So do I have that first point right with you, Earl?
Yes, you do. And I'm glad you said it that way, because I was thinking about saying that exactly, but I didn't know how much time you were going to give me.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. Now, my second point is my mother's family, my father's family came to the United States from Norway in 1917. So, I'm like third generation Norwegian, in the United States. My mother's family came to this, and they came in and poor, but found a job, and they did okay. I mean, my family was never wealthy, but we were middle class for 3 generations on my dad's side. On my mom's side, their family came over here from Wales in the late 1600s, settled up in Massachusetts, and did very well. I mean, they got wiped out in the Great Depression, the Republican Great Depression, but they were a fairly wealthy family before that. They were just totally thrown into poverty as a consequence of that. But I'm, on my mother's side, that's got to be like, what, 7, 8, 9 generations? I don't know how many generations it is to the late 1600s of accumulated middle class, of just basically having a middle class foundation that has echoed down to me, not just in money, but also, also culturally, also socially, also, having access to, schools, all these kind of things. And when I look around at folks that I know, black folks that I know, who are doing well, and I get to know them, what I'm seeing is that they are the second generation, maybe at the most the third generation of being in a of black people being in the middle class in the United States, that it just doesn't go back before that, period. And most are in the first generation of coming out of, the result of Jim Crow and redlining. Does that point make sense to you, Earl? And is that essentially what you were saying?
Exactly, because most of the successful black people that I know now never dreamt that they would have accumulated the wealth that they have when they were going into the educational system, going into the workplace. So you have got that right. I'm glad that you were able to embellish on that. But one other thing that I wanted to say, and then I'm going to jump off.
Yeah.
When you talk about this, you don't talk about the post-traumatic syndrome. Here in the black community and the poor sections of the black community, we are dealing with crime, we're dealing with drugs, we're dealing with death, with the gang problems, and so we don't have the proper nutrition because we have food deserts. We don't have the same kind of medical for our kids, and so there are a whole lot of elements that go into making a healthy individual that are limited in the black community and the brown community. Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Earl. I'm with you. And by the way, you, again, another caller who has set up my next hour. At the top of the next hour, Dr. Joy Lewis is going to be with us talking about how to deal with those kinds of trauma in those kinds of communities. Earl, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. It's great to hear from you. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind today?
Contract employers.
Okay, go for it.
What a lot of people here in the United States don't understand is that these hourly employees that you see in a lot of businesses do not actually work for the business they're standing in. They are employed by a contract employer who pays them X number of dollars. They have been hired by a large corporation or business to round up warm bodies to perform the task. And so the corporation pays the contract employer X number of dollars, then he makes his profit off of paying lower wages. He is also the person responsible for paying Social Security, Medicare, workman's comp, and unemployment insurance, federal tax, and state tax. But quite often he will tell people, I will just pay you and you handle this stuff yourself. And what they don't understand is that there is no contribution being made into Social Security or Medicare. And so this hurts us today, but it also hurts these people later on because they're going to discover they don't have any Social Security contributions and they are not eligible for Social Security to live off of when they're old. These international employees, international corporations, foreign businesses should be required to pay extra into Social Security, and they should be required to provide permanent full-time jobs with benefits, because if they want to come play in our sandbox, they should play by our rules, not by whatever they want. This is our country, and they owe an obligation to us, we the people, to come over here and run a business. They should treat our fellow citizens properly instead of treating them as nothing, as just warm bodies. There's another one waiting in the wings to do the job.
Yeah, Norma, this was the scam that Bernie discovered in the gift shops, the federal government gift shops in the Smithsonian and in airports and stuff, that these people were, the federal government was paying $20 an hour for the labor of these people, and then, to a contract employer. The contract employer was then paying them $10 an hour and keeping the rest of it themselves. I mean, it's nuts. I think Bernie put an end to that. But Norma, thank you. Spot on, as always. We will be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's the place where despair is not an option. The Thom Hartmann Program. Back with your calls right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. I'm just looking at the calls on my board, and just a shout out to Jay. You're listening on Sirius XM. I'm going to pick you up as soon as we come back on Sirius XM in about 4 minutes. So Jay, if you want to hang on, I see you've been on hold for quite a while. My apologies. Lewis in Granite Falls, Washington, listening to us on KBCS, where we are live right now. Hey, Lewis, you're on the air. What's up?
I I got it. Professor Hartmann, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Real quickly, if your outgo is more than your income, your upkeep will be your downfall.
Well said. Well said, Lewis.
So what I was trying to say is I belong to the 302 Operators Union. When I work, I make $47 an hour.
Whoa.
And, you know, I'm retired, and I get my Social Security and the pension. But when I want to work, you know, I pick up the phone, I go to work. I just want that for everybody. You know, the feeling that it gives you, the satisfaction that you can pay your bills, and like if you don't run your show right, if I don't run my accounts right, we're not going to be here. How come the government and everybody else don't have to do that?
Yeah. Well, the government doesn't have to run the way a business runs, mostly because the government produces the money. You know, the government prints money, businesses don't. And so government has, they can do a lot of things in a lot of ways that a business can't and a family can't. But setting that aside, I think your point that everybody should have a decent job and a decent income is not only an excellent point and well made, Lewis, but also I think is something that needs to be said more often. And thank you for saying it on our air. I appreciate the call, Lewis. Tom in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Tom, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up? Tom, you are on the air.
Yeah, I had a point on the unemployment thing, which no one's mentioned, including Professor Wolf.
Okay.
Those same 21 states with the lowest wages are also the major states with the vaccine holdout people. And the reason being, listen to this, most of your jobs now require a vaccine. So when these people go to apply for a job, they say, are you vaccinated? They go, I don't have to answer that. They don't get hired.
Oh, that's interesting.
In other words, the airline industries, the cruise industry reopening in Miami, a lot of the casinos, a lot of service industries that have a big public face are now requiring vaccinations.
Right.
All the anti-vaxxers can't get those jobs.
Right.
So they're in those states, it's a higher unemployment rate.
Yeah, I was reversing the telescope here and looking, you know, in the opposite direction, saying that if I live in a state like South Carolina, where, you know, it's below 50% vaccination rate and lots of people running around, you know, actively contagious without masks on, I don't want to be a server in a restaurant where those are the people I'm serving.
And I wouldn't want to hire a person who's not vaccinated.
Right. But I mean, even if I'm vaccinated, I don't want that job because, you know, vaccines aren't 100% effective. You know, even the Pfizer seems to have the best numbers, and they have a 5% breakthrough rate. You know, Johnson & Johnson's got something like a 30 or 40% breakthrough rate when you're talking about the South African variant, which is now coming to the United States. There's this new variant out of India. We don't even know what the breakthrough rate is on that. Would you want to put yourself in those positions, you know, for crap wages? It's just like, how much is your life worth? Tom, thank you for the call. Spot on. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane. Yeah, there are a few of us left for the sane among us. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Of course, at hartmannreport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at hartmannreport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at thomhartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator,
and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at hartmanreport.com and thomhartmann.com.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jay in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Jay, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I live in the Greenville region. I'm about, a half hour from the South Carolina line. And I wanted to respond to what the gentleman an hour ago called in about. I think it's a right-wing talking meme. And the reason is...
Jay, if I could just interrupt you for a second. For somebody who might have just tuned in, they don't know what that guy said an hour ago.
My fault. Yeah.
So, no, it's my job to... So we had this caller an hour ago from South Carolina who said that there's all these jobs out here and nobody wants to take them. So let me hand it off back to you, Jay.
Thanks, Tom. So, the whole region, this area where I am, that area, it's about a little south of me, Eastern Carolina, lots and lots of jobs. And I will say that there is a shred, I think, of truth to what the gentleman said, but these jobs have been open for a long time, and they've been very available. So I think it's putting the cart before the horse to blame it on a Biden stimulus. There's systemic problems. And, people, and like, take myself, I can work or not work if I want to, okay? But I haven't been working because I don't want to go out there because of COVID. I'm vaxxed. But, I think there's a number of factors, and I think this is just a small part of it. It's a right-wing talking meme. It's putting the cart before the horse. That's what I want.
Well, and when you look at the surveys, when you look at the statistics where they go out and they talk to people who are unemployed and ask, would you take this job, or what's the main thing that would prevent you from taking, a job as a server in a restaurant for $12 an hour plus tips, where you might make $15, $17, $20 an hour, who knows? And people say, number one, childcare, because, our schools aren't back yet and our daycare centers are not functioning and kids are still getting sick. And in fact, COVID is one of the top 10 leading causes of death for children in the United States right now. COVID, for God's sake. One of the top 10 leading causes of death. So number one, childcare, and my kids are at home and I want to keep them there. Number two, I'm worried about breakthrough infections. I don't want to get infected. I don't want to be in an environment where I'm having to interact with a lot of people who don't have masks on their faces. And right. I totally get it. And then number three might be, oh, gee, I make the same amount of money I made before, and now I'm just sitting on my butt eating Cheetos. Very, very few people are saying that because, generally speaking, people get very bored sitting on their butt eating Cheetos fairly quickly. And you find that there's, 2 or 3% of the population, and these numbers, by the way, are steady. I mean, you go back to the 60s and you look at the so-called welfare fraud numbers that Republicans are constantly talking about, people who, people who professionally live on welfare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Typically, it's between 2 and 4% of the population who are just fine doing that, right? Just kind of ripping off the system, as it were. The vast majority of people have no interest in that. You've got to, people find some meaning in work. They enjoy work. And even if it's a dead-end job, hey, it's a step to something better. It's a step to something else. It's something to do during the day. So this whole idea, and it's combined with another bizarre notion. It's basically what Republicans are saying is, if you give money to working class people or poor people, it makes them lazy. But if you give money to rich people with giant trillion-dollar tax breaks, George W. Bush's $5.6 trillion tax breaks, Donald Trump's $2 trillion tax breaks, Ronald Reagan's what turned out to be about a $7 trillion tax break. You give rich people tax breaks, it makes them work harder. It's like, What am I missing here? You give money to rich people, they work harder. You give money to poor people, they get lazy. How did that happen? I mean, it's just the logic of this is nuts. Jay, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. And I appreciate hearing your story. Sean in Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, Sean, you're on the air.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
It was actually kind of refreshing to hear Professor like Wolf on the air, that you had earlier in the program. Speaking on various topics. So sticking with the unemployment, for like a lot of people, the governor, of course, ended it.
In South Carolina.
Earlier, going on about like people not taking a job because blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, there's all those, like assertion standards kind of surrounding it. But for like a lot of people, that were only making, $7.25 an hour at, McDonald's or Wendy's and such, They're just, well, this is like the first time that I've ever experienced like to get some kind of security financially speaking. So why do I want to go back to something that doesn't do that for me?
Well, that's a good point, too, except that it's a very insecure thing. Unemployment, I mean, like you said, your governor just turned the spigot and cut off an extra $300 a week to people who are on unemployment.
Yeah.
Most of the red states don't allow you to be on unemployment for more than 6 months, period.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's just like all the trickle-down stuff with, heck, like even in South Carolina, you can't be on the food assistance for more than a certain period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, those go back. Those so-called reforms go back to the Clinton administration, actually.
But either way,
put a 5-year limit on welfare. It said, we have ended welfare as we know it. It's a new era.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. You got to work 30 hours a week to even stay on it.
Yeah.
For example, like unless you're disabled or something or another, then you can still get it. But
yeah. No, I totally get it. Sean, thank you for the call. We'll continue the conversation. We have a guest at the top of the next hour, Dr. Joy Lewis, the co-founder of the Healing Justice Foundation. And we're going to be talking about repairing the trauma, basically, that happens in minority communities when they're policed the way they are now and economically treated the way they are. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, entitled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia, Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s. hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrists swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native American, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly, as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann with you. Welcome back to the third hour of our program. We're confronting, and particularly communities of color in the United States, particularly black communities in this country, African-American communities, confronting some serious problems that go even beyond the obvious physical and economic challenges that have been imposed by 400 years of slavery and then Jim Crow and then redlining and, today just systemic structural racism, police violence, these ongoing crises. And Dr. Joy Lewis is working to do something about that. Dr. Lewis is the CEO and founder of the Healing Justice Foundation, a national nonprofit founded in Minneapolis that provides community resources to address inequalities and offers urgent healing and support to African Americans and black people. Also the author of Healing, the Act of Radical Self-Care. JOIUnlimited.com is Dr. Lewis's website. Dr. Joy Lewis, welcome to the program. Tell us about your program.
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for having me. So, yes, I am thrilled to be able to tell you about a program that we are in the middle of. We just did one of the forums yesterday, A Time of Reckoning. And for the Time of Reckoning, we have been looking at the criminal justice system and it's collateral consequences, particularly its collateral consequences on the black family. And so, it's one thing to sort of look at, yes, there are black bodies that have been murdered all across this country, and we're looking at the criminal justice system, but then we say, what are the things, the collateral consequences that actually affect black families? So looking at housing, looking at schools, looking at the things that keep the black family for actually flourishing. So we have been in the process for over the last year. We've had 4 forums, and we have a policy forum that's coming up on June 23rd.
That's remarkable stuff. Can you share with people who might not have had the experience of being in, growing up in, living in, or even living near communities where that are experiencing these various forms of violence, whether it's police violence or whether it's the economic violence that's visited upon minorities generally or specifically, and poor people more generally across the United States by our system, by the way that the system is set up, and how unwilling we have, a group of politicians to even embrace simple things like, we're the only country in the developed world that doesn't have, paid child and family leave, which is kind of, I suppose, way up there. But how, for example, the community where George Floyd lived, he gets murdered by a police officer. How does the trauma of that, experiencing the trauma of that, a block from your house, how does that echo into the community? What does that do to people?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things and one of the reasons that I founded the Healing Justice Foundation, because, it's just very glaring, in other communities, often what happens is that when tragedies happen, lots of support is sent in. But for black communities, it doesn't happen like that. Whenever black bodies are murdered, there's no Red Cross that's sent in for us, right? To the opposite, actually, what happens is that what begins to happen is that there's military force that's brought in, right? That we wake up, not only did we have a tragedy that somebody was murdered a block from our house, but we wake up and instead of there being, support that's brought in, that, there are tanks that are here. There's tear gas that is brought in. There are more police that are brought in. And then not only that, then there are, instead of resources being brought in, resources are cut off. So, right after the murder of George Floyd, I mean, it was terrible. Like, grocery stores shut down, transportation shut down. So people could not get to, drugstores to get their medicine. I'm talking about, elders were at risk, children were at risk, could not get food. So it's like basic things that people can get. So you're already, mourning the fact that somebody was murdered, and you're afraid and you're scared. But then just basic things. We have to get together to just try to have some mutual aid to figure out how are people going to get fed. How are we going to make sure that children are getting basic, like Pampers? How are we going to make sure that elders are getting their medicine? I mean, these are basic things. So again, instead of resources being brought in, the exact opposite is taking place.
So
that's terrible.
I agree. We're talking with Dr. Joy Lewis, the CEO and founder of the Healing Justice Foundation, and also the author of Healing, the Act of Radical Self-Care. So, Dr. Lewis, what has been done? What works? What are the best practices here? What should we, and I realize this is kind of Band-Aids, in some ways putting Band-Aids on a cancer. I mean, we need a large systemic structural change in our society to stop these things from happening in the first place, and these situations from being the reality that so many people live in. But over the short term, the stuff that you're doing, what are the best practices there? What works? What can a community do to heal itself from this kind of severe trauma?
Well, I mean, what has to happen is that the resources we have to make sure that the resources that actually belong to the community, the resources from the taxpayers that as the decisions are being made, whether that is at the county, the state level, that these resources are actually going into the hands of community members who are making the decisions that are closest to community, that are actually getting to folks who actually need it. All of these folks who are, trying to make these decisions, who haven't talked to people who are on the ground, that doesn't work. People who are close to the community, who know like where people live, what people need, what's actually going on, what it is that people need. So what we have been doing is gathering folks to get firsthand. So like yesterday, we had we called the Black Family Reunion, where we had elders and youth together talking about what are the solutions that actually people need to, what is it that we need to be doing? And people are brilliant about the kinds of things that should be happening in schools, the kinds of things that should be happening in neighborhoods. And we're taking these suggestions that people are saying and making sure that those things are put in the hands so they can be funded. Because what happens is you have folks who haven't talked to community, who are making decisions that don't make sense for the people who things actually affect. And so, the kind of mutual aid things where folks really quickly or saying, oh, okay, these folks on this block need X, Y, and Z. And we organize together to make sure that people get those things firsthand. Those are the things that actually work, and not having people to fill out, 20 forms before they can actually get things that they actually need.
Yeah. So communities caring for themselves, creating community organizations like yours has done, the Healing Justice Foundation.
Right, and actually making sure that people are getting the resources and backed to be able to get those resources and have them to be put in their hands. And I think that the other thing is that when folks think about healing and folks healing from trauma, they think, oh, this is going to be. I'm sorry, do I need to?
Yeah,
stop?
we need to wrap it up,
okay.
Dr. Lewis.
Okay.
But
okay.
You can finish your thought real quick.
Just saying that, it's not going to be a quick fix, but people know what it is that needs to happen and to talk directly to the community.
Is there a website for the Healing Justice Foundation?
Yes, it's healingjusticefoundation.org.
Great, thank you. Hang on just a second here. We're going to get stepped on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Dr. Joy Lewis, the CEO and founder of the Healing Justice Foundation, JOIUnlimited.com and healingjusticefoundation.org. Dr. Lewis, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Oh, bring up the phones here. Always a good idea, right? As they say in the radio business. Rennie in Reno, Nevada. Hey, Rennie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
I can, just fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I know, but I walk around multitasking while I listen to you.
All right, it's all good, Reddy. What's on your mind?
So I taught public school, kindergarten, all the way through 12th grade, in mostly Title I schools that are basically low income. And I was wondering what your opinion is if we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, if it's going to increase the dropout rate in high school students.
Because they will go into the labor market?
Yeah, they're coming into class and sleeping in class if they make it to class on time.
Right.
So they're exhausted, they're falling asleep. A lot of them are working fast food, or it's a casino town, maybe valet cars. And I even had a 6th grade student whose family owned a restaurant, so they were keeping him out till midnight every night working in the restaurant, and he was falling asleep in class every day.
Wow.
So I hope that you reach out to some of the school administrators around the country and get their opinion on what they think that the dropout rate might increase. This will be an interesting data.
It would be an interesting data point. My guess is that anybody who is inclined to drop out of school and jump into the labor market is probably going to do that, not so much because the labor market is attractive to them, but because they're struggling in school. And it seems to me that, and you've taught K through 12, reality check this with me, that if you've got a really good school system that's really well engaged with its kids, that at least getting a high school diploma, which would guarantee, better lifetime earnings than dropping out in 10th or 11th grade, would be something kids would stay with.
Yeah, they have career centers in all the high schools here, and they're very active on putting out all the jobs, and they'll even put out the jobs, print them out, and paste them right on the hallways so the students can pass by and look, don't have to take the time to even go online and try. So there's some very motivation.
Well, I can get that for like the last 6 months of your senior year, but you're talking about exposing the entire student body to that?
Well, in the high school.
Yeah. So
if the career centers are in the high school, they're not there.
No, but I mean,
they're
you've got 3 or 4 years worth of 10th, 11th, 12th grade, basically, in high schools. And
9th through 12th here.
Yeah, 9 through 12. I can totally see a career center, as people are planning their exit from school, interacting with the kids. But it seems to me bizarre that they would be telling, 9th graders that there's job opportunities out there.
No, actually, the Career Center focuses more on all the grants that are available, the internships. They have a very active internship program here where if somebody has an interest, they can go out and speak to this intern expert, and they try to get them an internship job.
Well, you raise an interesting question, Rennie, and I don't know the answer to it, and I'll poke around and see what I can find. My guess is that the effect will be minimal, but it may be there, and if it is there, I guarantee you that some conservative will find it and will use it to say, don't raise the minimum wage. Rennie, thank you for the call. It's great talking with you. I realize you're not that conservative I was talking about. Or maybe you are, but I think not. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at ThomHartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. You know, just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Tony in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Yes. In response to the call of the gentleman from South Carolina, a lot of the corporations, yes, he has a point. They do have now hiring signs out. They have been up there for quite a while. But what he may not be aware of is the newest form of discrimination that a lot of these red state employers use is when you apply for a job, aside from checking your employer references, they check your credit. And if your credit score is too low, no matter how qualified you might be, you don't get the job.
That's nuts. I mean, I realize that's going on, Tony, but that's absolutely nuts. And in fact, it should be banned. I mean, it's
I agree.
It's incredible. I just sent off to my publishers, to my editor actually. It'll come back next month, and I'll have a couple of weeks to do a final pass through on it. But the book that's going to come out a year from now is called The Hidden History of Big Brother. And what I discovered when I was writing this book is that there are companies that don't just sort through your credit score. They literally go through your life. I mean, they go through your social media stuff. They go through, where you purchase things. They buy information from other retailers. They look at your credit card activity. They look at absolutely everything you've done, what websites you visit, and then compile a score as, how likely you are to be a problematic employee. And then there are companies that do this not just for employers. There's companies that do this for retail stores. To say, don't let this customer in the store, or don't let this customer, return goods, or don't let them buy things on time. You were going to say something, Tony.
It's funny you should mention that, because my nephew applied for a position with the Tucson Police Department, and not only do they go through, like you said, they look at your Facebook page, but you have to give them your password, and they have to have access while you're sitting there to sign into your Facebook page and see who and what you follow, who and what you comment on. I mean, there's just, along with getting your credit score checked.
Well, I think the rules are a little different if you're applying for a job where you're given a gun and the legal right to kill people.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a problem with that with cops, frankly, with looking at their Facebook pages and seeing if they're members of a white supremacist group, or they've been calling for violence or whatever. I mean, there's frankly a lot of that going on out there. But somebody who wants to work at Walmart.
Walmart, they haven't quite gotten to that extreme yet, but they're trying.
Yeah. No, I get it. I do think that there should be different rules for police, but that said, I get what you're saying and largely agree. Tony, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Joe in Nutley, New Jersey. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. I just wanted to comment on the idea that people are lazy and they don't want to work. And that's my point would be, I cannot think of a worse profession than a proctologist. And there doesn't seem to be any shortage in that particular profession.
Right.
I mean, it's just.
It's like when John McCain was, arguing against raising the minimum wage, and he said, we could pay people $50 an hour here in Arizona to pick lettuce. There's large farms actually in Arizona. People don't realize it because of irrigation.
Understood. Yeah, I live there. I lived there for.
Okay. Yeah. He says we could pay people $50 an hour to pick lettuce out here, and we still wouldn't have applicants. And he got over 10,000 serious people, saying yes, $50 an hour. I will move to Arizona and I will pick lettuce for a year. I promise.
If you remember, Stephen Colbert said he volunteered to go pick crops, and he said that he threw people out. Come follow me and see how easy a job it is. It's a miserable job. And
sure.
And anyway, my point being is, the idea that I know people that were servers, bartenders, restaurant workers, and when they made money, they made a lot of money. But when times are slow, they come home with $35 a night, $40 a night.
Right, which is now, by the way. I mean, you know, some restaurants, there's very few restaurants that, like, there's one restaurant down the street from us that has this huge outdoor area that they've had forever. You know, they've got this big deck that goes out over the Columbia River. They're full. They're doing great. But most restaurants don't have that kind of luxury, and so their servers are making diddly squat because, you know, the restaurant's running at 20% capacity.
Also, depends on the weather. If you can stay outside, I mean, who wants to eat outdoors when it's 45 degrees?
And
it's
raining.
Not particularly. Yeah.
Which is here today.
And when they enclose the outdoor area in a tent, I'm not seeing how that's an improvement on being indoors in terms of COVID.
Yeah,
you know,
it's a tough one. It's a tough one. But Joey, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, like I said, in this, I've been reading these studies. I incorporated some of them into a book I wrote in 2001 called Screwed. I read it. Okay, you know, around 3 or 4% of your population are going to be deadbeats, as it were, and as a lifestyle, they'll choose that, but no more than that. So, you know, okay, I'm willing to subsidize those people for the other 30 or 40% of the population that really needs some help to actually get some help, and for people to get good wages. Joe, thank you. You said it so well. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Oh, well, people don't want to work. People want to work. They just don't want to work for lousy wages and jobs that could kill them. We'll be back.
Our book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. That feminism is as intrinsic to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professional asexual women. And now, again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many. But they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex, and so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward, and almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists? Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID, that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a couple of quick things. First, a news tip. This is great. Sean printed this out and said, wow, big news. Yesterday I did a labor panel for WCPT for 2 hours on our Chicago affiliate, which was great. It was a lot of fun. And I was joined by Joan Esposito and Rick Unger, who are both hosts on WCPT as well.
And my colleagues, who I both like and respect, really good people doing really great work. But speaking of unions, this is a Chicago-based story, bud tenders. Now, you've heard of bartenders. You know what a bud tender is? You know, it's like the bartender at a pot store, right? Bud tenders at Modern Cannabis in the North River neighborhood of Chicago have voted overwhelmingly to join Teamsters Local 777. They are the first cannabis workers to do so. Jim Glimko, the president of Local 777, says, "Congratulations to our newest members. As more and more states legalize recreational cannabis and the entire industry expands exponentially, workers are realizing that the Teamsters are the best union to ensure that the people who make these businesses succeed are not left out of the prosperity associated with this growth." And he is right. Also, a quick geeky science for you, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. This is a fascinating study. This involves 16,000 women over the age of 60. And what they found was, how many steps a day does a person have to take to actually extend their lifespan, to live longer? And what they found was that the magic number appears to be 4,500 steps a day, which is, roughly 2 miles. 4,500, so maybe just a little bit more than 2 miles. 4,500 steps a day is enough to help extend the human lifespan. In comparison to taking no steps at all, researchers found an additional 1,000 steps contributes to a 28% decrease in death. Women who took more than 2,000 steps daily in uninterrupted bouts, in other words, a continuous walk, 2,000 steps, displayed a 32% decrease in the risk of death. And those who took 4,500 steps a day had the absolute lowest risk of death in comparison to all other categories of active women. Fascinating new study. This was, trying to tell you where I got this. Oh, University of North Carolina. The study leader was Christopher Moore, PhD, the epidemiology department there. So, there you go. Fascinating stuff. Picking up your phone calls, Ike in Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, Ike.
You present a good argument for dumping your Facebook page ASAP.
If you want to become a cop, for sure. Yeah.
Well, and, I think I might change my registration while I'm at it. An independent would do just as well because I know how to vote when I get in the booth. That's if we're allowed to vote the way Republicans are acting. But listen, as a directly at Greenville, South Carolina, which is the upstate, which is the people that keep getting this idiot Lindsey Graham elected and keeping this state Republican. I'm in the down south low country down here in Charleston, and as a matter of fact, Clyburn is my representative. We know how to vote in this part of the country. But I just want to say something to that fella. You sit there and you look at other people and you make judgments all day long. And you Republicans have a real problem with that. Whether they're not holy enough, they're not patriotic enough, they're not this or that, they're not the right color, they don't love the right person. You're a very judgmental person. And I can tell you something about your life because I've already lived it.
Can I pause you just for a second? Can you start using the word they instead of you? Because you're talking about Republicans, not about me, and I keep hearing this.
No. I'm talking directly to him, but okay.
Yeah.
But I've already lived your life, and let me just tell this fellow where he's going.
Okay, all right.
Okay?
Go for it, Ike.
Where you're going is where I've been. When I was 22, I had a heart attack. You know why? I was riding a bicycle between 3 jobs. I kept count one week. I got 27 hours sleep in a week. Okay, and then I made my mind up that I wasn't going to work that kind of hours anymore. And, I later went on and I worked 2 jobs. I figured that was okay because I needed that money to try to raise my kids and have a family. Well, you know what it led to? And it's the same place that you're at. I bet you don't spend no time with your kids. I bet you don't spend any time with your wife. I bet you your quality of life revolves all around one thing, and you wear it like a badge of honor. I worked 70 hours this week. I worked 80 hours this week. And meanwhile, your family suffers for it. You don't have a quality of life. You should go back and look at the Second Bill of Rights and understand that for a man to be a good husband and a good father and a good community citizen, you have to have free time and you have to have resources. And you can't do it the way that you're trying to do it. And quit wearing it as a badge of honor, because I can tell you, you're going to wind up just like my dad did. 2 years after he retired, he was dead. Now, if that's the kind of life that you think America's supposed to be made of, I'm sorry, you need to reevaluate your entire life, because I believe you're wrong.
Great speech to the fellow in South Carolina, your colleague or your fellow South Carolinian, who I don't know if he's still listening or not, but well said, Ike.
Well, it's something that everybody needs to hear. And yes, we do need child care, and yes, we do need trickle up instead of trickle down. The Reagan days are dead and gone, and the Republicans need to get it through their thick skull. No matter what you do, I'm going to be at that voting booth, and I don't care if I'm disabled and crush my legs on a job and they threw me away like a pile of garbage, and I live on $500 a month. You know what? I'm still here. I'm still fighting, and I ain't giving up.
Yeah, there you go. And I loved
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, thank you, Ike. And I loved your comment about trickle up rather than trickle down. This is there's an old Will Rogers quote that's going around the internet, and this was during the Great Depression, and he was talking about Herbert Hoover, right? Herbert Hoover was president, the third Republican president, Harding, Coolidge, and then Hoover during the Roaring '20s. This was before the before the end of his term. And Will Rogers says, this election was lost 4 and 6 years ago, not this year. The Republicans didn't start thinking of the old common fellow. He's talking about, why did FDR just get elected? He said the Republicans didn't start thinking of the old common fellow until just as they started out on the election tour. The money was all appropriated for the top in the hopes that it would trickle down to the needy. Mr. Hoover, now that was the president, Mr. Hoover was an engineer. He knew that water trickles down. Put it uphill and let it go, and it will reach the driest little spot. But he didn't know that money trickles up. Give it to the people at the bottom, and the people at the top will have it before the night anyhow, but at least it will have passed through the hands of the poor fellows. They saved the big banks, but the little ones went up the flue. So Will Rogers on trickle-up economics, and a tip of the hat to Bruce, who shared that with me. Thank you, Bruce, for that. Anyhow, back to your calls. Steve in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I think my sister's company has got it right when it comes to COVID not being in the workplace. They tried those CDC cards, and 3 times they had to shut down. So people were lying. They had a card, but it was a bogus card.
So people kept bringing infections into her place of business?
Not just in the factory, but also in the office.
Yeah.
The office.
Yeah, there's a healthy trade in counterfeit vaccine cards right now. It's not a good thing. It's why we need state-based. I mean, the state of Oregon knows whether I'm vaccinated or not, right? Because the state paid for all these vaccines, so they've got that data. And New York State is setting up a vaccine passport that you put on a cell phone, or on a smartphone. I think we need a national vaccine passport that's reliable.
Well, our company's now waiting because they had to shut a factory down already within the last year. So now what they're doing is the existing employees, they have to go get an antigen test.
An antigen test. Oh, to prove that they actually are vaccinated. Wow. Wow. I got it. Steve, thank you for that. Thanks for the information. That's amazing. I mean, we're gonna get there, I think, where it's safer out there, but the Republicans are fighting this tooth and nail because they want people sick, they want people poor, they want people afraid.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Ami in New Orleans, Louisiana. Am I saying your name right?
Ami?
Ami? Yeah. Hey, what's up?
Hi. You have a wonderful show as always, Dr. Hartman. My question, my concern is, I think the media and officials for our country and the corporations, they're gaslighting us. The reason why I say that is because I'm trying to figure out what more they want from us. I'm a person that's ADOS, and I tell you that's not a mental disorder. I could trace back to the colonial settlers we came from Virginia, like the Teleferros, the Sarton, the Nelsons, the Duncans, and they brought us down here 260 years later in the South, down here in Mississippi, for cotton after we picked tobacco. We struggle, and we struggle. My thing is, after all the struggle, what more do they want at this point?
They want everything. I mean, I'm telling you, there is, greed has no limits. You know, these folks who are just like, you know, they've got 20 billion, they want to have 40 billion. They got 40 billion, they want to have 80 billion. You know, they got 100 million, they want to have 500 million. It's like they're, particularly the ones who are in this cycle of just absolute. I think it's a hoarding. You know, you see on TV these show. There used to be a show called Hoarders, and you know, it was about these people. You walk into their apartment and floor to ceiling newspapers and you know, hundreds and hundreds of old tin cans in their kitchen, and they can not throw anything away. That is a mental disorder. It's called hoarding syndrome. It's a subset of obsessive compulsive disorder. And I am convinced, Ami, that a whole bunch of these really, really wealthy Republicans have hoarding syndrome, but they were born into enough wealth that their hoarding syndrome has focused itself, their OCD has focused itself not on tin cans or thread or newspapers, but on money. That's my
antisocial behavior.
Yeah, that's my theory.
Thank you.
Yeah, good talking to you, Ami. Thank you very much. Like I said, they want everything. Mike in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Mike, what's up?
How's it going, Tom? Keep up the good work. Love you.
Thank you.
And we need to pass that bill for the infrastructure. You know, we're so far behind, and here's the 21st century. Put people to work building the Autobahn across this country. I want to be able to drive my car 150 miles an hour.
Hey, it worked for Hitler.
A Mustang, you know? And what about the 300-mile-an-hour train? Put people to work across that. Let's move into the 21st century.
Yep.
Every house should be its own power plant.
Yep.
I got vacation property at Lake Billy Chinook, Three Rivers area. Every single cabin is on solar panels, battery house.
Yep.
I admit they have a propane a backup system, but I have a friend that lives there year round, and he uses maybe 30 gallons of propane a year. You know.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you, Mike, and we need to start building this way. We need to be retrofitting houses that are inefficient, and we need to solarize the whole damn country. And frankly, if you can't do it at the level of the house, it should be done at the level of the neighborhood, and to build a resilient system. Mike's spot on. Thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to KMUZ. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally, when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the people, by the framers at the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Mary in Panama City, Florida. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've talked to you before. You're great. I'm calling about the economy and that. I'm one of the baby boomers. And when back then we started working at 7 and 8 years old, shoveling snow and everything and throwing papers. And I started waiting tables at 13. I'm 74 years old now, and when COVID started, I lost my job as a waitress and never got called back, and I've been trying for over a year to get my unemployment. Couldn't get through to them. And now I started working. Yeah, and now I just got a job at Burger King making $10.50 an hour.
Oh, my.
Which is more than I've ever made, but it's not enough when you've got medications and doctors and mortgages and everything. And my very dear friend who is a disabled veteran, we're helping each other, and it's still not enough. And I think the Republicans ought to get off their rear ends and let Biden take care of us American people who have worked for this country all our lives.
I'm with you, Murray. I'm absolutely with you. And yeah,
I was
go ahead.
I was hoping we would get some more stimulus checks, but I don't know.
Yeah. And this idea that people don't want to work is just nuts. Mary, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. It's, and a lot of us started out, quote, working when we were young. I had a newspaper route when I was, 8, I think? 9 years old, something like that. But that's a whole different thing from trying to support your family or trying to, just get by or dropping out of school. Like, we had an earlier caller where we had a conversation about. So anyway, Al in Zanesville, Ohio. Hey, Al, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I owned a restaurant for 40 years. I sold it a couple years ago before this happened, so I kind of escaped all this. But it's more generally talking about capitalism. These people that flaunt and brag about capitalism as the answer, when it turns on them, they seek different answers. They usually get some sort of a socialistic, resolve for their problem. Now workers are experiencing the upside of capitalism for them. They are now, in scarcity, so their value has gone up, and now people are complaining. I mean, legislators are trying to use coercion to get them back to work, but it's just capitalism working.
You're right.
I mean, that's
it's supply and demand.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if the cost of labor goes up, the cost of labor goes up, and I know Greenspan used to call that wage inflation. I would call it moving toward a just society. Al, well said.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Jeremy in Vigo County, Indiana. Hey, Jeremy, what's up?
Yes, hello. I disagree with you that it's wealthy are hoarders. I believe it's more like an akin to game addiction, like check out video game addiction, but game addiction in general, and that they get an endorphin bump anytime they overcome challenges.
Well, that's what happens with hoarders.
Yeah, and it's a high score thing, though, with their net wealth. I think that it's not just...
Oh, so you're saying it's not just OCD, that it's an actual addiction.
Yeah, that's for most of them, not all of them, but like a good chunk of them. That'd be it. And they're raised in that environment, that they're rewarded for, getting, overcoming certain challenges to increase their net wealth or whatever. And they've been playing this game, the wealthy play this game going back probably to the beginning of time. And now we can see it with regular individuals, even in video games, where people get addicted to video games. And it's a human thing, not like an OCD, not the bell-shaped curve thing, but like anybody I feel could become it, or a large group of people can become it because it's an addiction to that high score, to that net wealth.
Right, and we're all vulnerable, although there's a spectrum of severity of that vulnerability to anything that just gives us endorphin rushes, whether it's falling in love, or whether it's heroin, or whether it's cocaine.
I suspect you don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I suspect you don't play very many video games. I suspect that. I don't know, but I recommend looking into video game addiction and comparing that and seeing what your thoughts might be on that.
It's kind of the same thing as gambling addiction, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that would be a reason why we need a lower wealth gap, because the higher wealthy people, they see the world as their game, is how I perceive them perceiving it based on my experiences. I'm not a wealthy person. I've interacted with wealthy people, and I've looked into this stuff, but I've also known them.
I think you're onto something, Jeremy.
It's always a gig to them.
Jeremy, I have to wrap it up. I'm sorry, it's the end of the show, but I think you're onto something. And let me recalibrate my thinking. That's interesting. Wealth as an addiction. It makes a lot of sense. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back soon. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So, be good to yourself and the people around you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you soon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.